Not too long ago, we did a video on the 10 best states in America to retire to, but this got us thinking. If we can help our viewers find the best opportunities for their golden years, then we should also make them aware of some of the worst opportunities in hopes of preventing a poor decision that could ruin the best years of their lives. So today, we'll be giving you a look at the 10 worst states to retire to based on metrics such as cost of living, available healthcare, and overall quality of life in the state, with over 234,000 Americans using their retirement as an opportunity to find a new home that better suited their needs in 2022. There were many among them who came to regret those decisions because they moved to some of the states on this list. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 10. Arkansas. Arkansas earned the moniker of the natural state, thanks largely to being home to 52 state parks and 7 national parks, like the Ozarks, as well as multiple beautiful bodies of water, like the Arkansas River for fishing and boating. In fact, the Washington National Forest is the oldest of its kind in the South and was established by President Theodore Roosevelt himself in 1907. Also, unlike many other states like California or New York, Arkansas has no large metropolitan area. Instead, the many smaller and more spacious cities like Little Rock make the state a more comfortable, breathable home for many. Or it would be if Little Rock wasn't constantly ranked as one of the most dangerous cities in the country. Crime in the state is so bad that approximately 30% of Arkansas residents have experienced some form of property crime. While the cost of living is low, this is offset by the crime rates in towns like Fort Smith being continuously dubbed as one of the unhappiest communities in America. As for retirees specifically, good healthcare is sparse in Arkansas. Despite there being more than 100 hospitals in the state, they are constantly ranked as some of the worst in the nation, with most of them in poor condition and lacking the funding for necessary repairs and supplies. State officials have heavily resisted helping out the citizens in their state as well, to the point where the federal government had to step in during the pandemic and force Arkansas to re-enroll in government assistance programs. With all of this in mind, the natural state seems like a natural choice to strike from your list if you're looking for good quality of life when trying to find a new home in retirement. Number 9. Maryland. Maryland is a beautiful and historic state, and despite its small size, it's home to 4,000 miles of shoreline between its beaches on the Atlantic Ocean, banks of the Potomac River, and harbors of Chesapeake Bay, not to mention the 400 separate lakes in the state. Maryland is also home to some of the best medical facilities in the country, including the University of Maryland Medical Center, the Sinai Hospital of Baltimore, and most famously, Johns Hopkins Hospital. Unfortunately, this top-notch medical care also comes with high property taxes and home costs, and many of the patients at these hospitals may have been put there by simply being residents of the city of Baltimore anyway, as the city is constantly ranked as one of the most dangerous in the country. And while the median income in Maryland is relatively decent in the state, this is telling of a different problem entirely, as 1 in 12 households in the state have an income in the 7 figures or more, meaning that those on the opposite side, ergo poverty, have larger numbers on their side and a bigger wage gap that is present in many other places in the nation. As for those who can afford to live safely away from the poverty line in comfort, though, another problem arises. The population and traffic are both so congested in Maryland that a simple 20-mile drive to Washington, D.C., Delaware, or any of the neighboring states can take you upwards of 90 minutes as you get stuck in some of the worst traffic in the country. Number 8. Washington. The Evergreen State earned its nickname thanks to being home to 3 national parks, 68 state parks, and the rain that frequents Washington, keeping the greenery lively. It's also home to a number of wonders, both natural and man-made, including the Seattle Space Needle, the highest peak in the continental U.S. at Mount Rainier, and is even home to the deadliest volcano in American history, Mount St. Helens. But all of the rain that causes the trees to come alive in the Evergreen State also brings seasonal depression for the residents, as there can be months of wet gloom from the fall through the spring before summer finally brings the nice coastal weather in, not to mention the array of natural disasters that the state faces, including wildfires, earthquakes, and landslides. And despite retirees finding great healthcare and medical centers throughout Washington, such as the University of Washington Medical Center, this great quality of life comes with the caveat of some of the highest housing costs in the nation. In fact, while the national average for housing costs sits around $390,000. The state of Washington ups that to an insane average of $592,000. Considering that the sales tax is 1.5% higher than national averages as well, such an expensive home during your retirement years just doesn't seem worth it. Number 7. Illinois. Illinois has been a state since 1818 and earned the nickname the Prairie State, thanks to its large areas of tall grassland prairies that cover the state. Unfortunately, largely because the city of Chicago, the controversies and crime over the last 200 years have given the state a less than welcoming reputation. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed around 18,000 buildings, unhousing around 100,000 citizens of the city and killing between 200 to 300 more. Then the Prohibition era of the United States saw Chicago become the biggest hotspot for criminal activity, as seen in the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where Al Capone had 7 rival gang members shot in the middle of the day in a warehouse. Even the modern era has seen Chicago gain a reputation as heavily violent, earning the moniker of Chirac, and constantly ranking as one of the most dangerous cities in the nation. But retirees who avoid the city still won't have many reasons to settle elsewhere in the state, especially when considering the infamous winters that hazard the Illinois landscape, immobilizing the population entirely for days at a time. In addition to all of these issues, retirees will find higher sales tax and property taxes when compared to other states. And while many other states offer tax breaks or neglect to tax retirement accounts entirely, Illinois grants no such leniencies, taxing seniors as though they were still working a 9-to-5. Number 6. Louisiana. Being founded by the French, worked by African slaves, taken by the Spanish for 40 years, and bought by the United States in 1803 are some of the reasons why Louisiana has developed into one of the most culturally diverse states in the nation. This cultural love can be seen in the state's vibrant Creole culture, the beautiful French colonial buildings, and the world-renowned Mardi Gras celebration held in New Orleans. Unfortunately, the Big Easy is one of the poorest placed cities, as disasters in New Orleans constantly leave the famous city devastated. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina rolled through Louisiana, killing more than 1,800 people and destroying over 275,000 homes. The bowl-shaped setting of New Orleans' geographic location means that every hurricane that bowls through the state, and there are a lot, leaves the city flooded and destroyed every time. And much like Illinois, Louisiana has also gained a reputation for violence, constantly ranking as one of the worst in the country for crime and violence, not to mention the state's controversial past and present with political corruption and high poverty rates. As for retirees specifically, healthcare services are left wanting too, constantly ranking as some of the worst in the nation. Between the violent crime rates, natural disasters, high utility rates, and shameful poverty levels, when considering places to retire, Louisiana is a hard sell, to say the least. Number 5. New York. Those who come from the Empire State can tell you firsthand that despite popular beliefs, there are 2 different New Yorks. New York City is a sprawling metropolis that houses the world-famous Statue of Liberty, runs the world's economy from the New York Stock Exchange, and whose Ellis Island an estimated 40% of Americans can trace their family's entry into the country. Meanwhile, upstate New York is a beautiful northeastern state that is home to the Adirondack Mountains, Niagara Falls, and agricultural communities whose families have lived there since colonial times. Unfortunately, this creates 2 separate worlds, both of which are equally unwelcoming for potential inbound retirees. In the city, rent for a 1-bedroom apartment averages $4,600 per month, with an insanely high cost of living to boot. And despite easy access to public transportation, traffic can still be unbearable, especially during New York winters. Meanwhile, those that live upstate do get to reap the rewards of lower housing costs and cheaper costs of living. However, despite it being cheaper and equally lower paying, residents of upstate New York still have to pay the 3rd highest taxes in the country. thanks largely to its connection to the much more expensive city. For seniors and retirees who need extra assistance, there are tax breaks for the elderly as well as a number of impressive medical facilities throughout the state. Unfortunately for those patients, the cost of that medical care is very expensive, and most retirees who already live in New York struggle to find affordable assisted care or housing, making the state unappealing to anyone looking for a comfortable retirement destination, and the reason why so many head to southern states for their retirement years. Number 4. Oklahoma. In the 19th century, thanks to a little thing called manifest destiny, the United States kept expanding westward, forcing the indigenous native tribes off of their ancestral lands and into other regions that the government saw little use for. This was how Oklahoma became home to 38 different tribal nations and became seen as the epitome of Western American prairie life. Today, the Sooner State has one of the liveliest Native American and Western arts scenes ever, with countless museums and exhibits like the Oklahoma City Museum of Art and the Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa. The state also has one of the lowest costs of living in the nation, spacious land with clean air, and an average home cost that is $160,000 cheaper than the national average. So why wouldn't anyone want to retire in this beautiful prairie state? Well, for one, the area is smack dab in the center of Tornado Alley, an area of the United States that experiences tornadoes, hail, and flash floods about as frequently as Seattle does rain. And if you need to drive to get anywhere, you'll be driving a long way to access a metropolitan area, or even worse, to get to the nearest hospital. The largest city in the state, Oklahoma City, only has a population of around 700,000, meaning that many services offered in metropolitan areas are much less available to seniors or others in need in the rest of the state. Also, for those who can't drive themselves or don't have their own transportation, there are very few public transportation options in the entire state. And for those who can manage an automobile, the roads in Oklahoma are awful, with potholes and undermanaged infrastructure found everywhere. No disrespect, but unless you are entirely self-sustaining and don't mind driving hours at a time, there simply aren't enough reasons for a retiree to want to move to Oklahoma. Number 3. Mississippi. There honestly just isn't much to say for the sake of Mississippi in terms of reasons to move there, other than the 62 miles of shoreline on the Gulf of Mexico and the very inexpensive living. The Magnolia State, on average, has the lowest housing, rent, and living costs in the nation. Unfortunately, much of that is due to the lack of opportunities, poor policies in the past that have led to disenfranchisement and poverty, and the poorest life expectancy in the nation. Mississippi also ranks lowest in healthcare, and despite 112 hospitals spread throughout the state, only 4 were good enough to be considered for national ranking, and the recent shortage of nurses has nothing to do with it. As for nature and history lovers, the state may offer a lot in terms of its beaches, hunting opportunities, and historical sites, but it quickly loses those brownie points the moment that mosquitoes or one of the many tornadoes hit you. Much like Oklahoma, Dorothy's favorite plot device frequents the area to the point where Mississippi ranks number 4 in terms of most hurricanes and tornadoes. Overall, aside from the low cost of living, the Magnolia State offers little for retirees, other than poor healthcare and a low quality of life. Number 2. New Jersey. While its nickname the Garden State may give people the impression of a green and spacious state, New Jersey is the most densely populated, with around 9.2 million residents in an area of just over 8,700 square miles. But it is also a beautiful beach state, with over 50 seaside resort towns along its coastline, made famous in pop culture by MTV's Jersey Shore, and gambling fans of old, new Atlantic City well before its Sin City counterpart out west. Unfortunately, the dense population and close proximity to metropolitan areas like New York City make the congested traffic unbearable for even the sprightliest of drivers. But the worst part about the state is the insane tax policies, which are some of the worst in the nation and have made New Jersey one of the most outbound states in recent years. On top of the ever-increasing cost of living in the state, with its unreasonable property taxes and a 6.6% sales tax, New Jersey is one of only a few states with an estate tax, making sure they squeeze as much money as possible from every man, woman, and retiree. Number 1. Kentucky. Kentucky was granted statehood in 1792, making it the first to be given this honor west of the Appalachian Mountains. A beautiful state surrounded by tree-covered mountains, Kentucky has been made famous for the world-renowned horse race at the Kentucky Derby, as well as the bourbon that comes out of the bluegrass state. With certain states on this list, there have been a theme that should be recognized, and it is exemplified perfectly by our number one spot. In Kentucky, the cost of living is lower than the majority of the nation, as are the housing costs and rent, to say nothing of the tax breaks that senior citizens get. Unfortunately, the cheaper it is to live in a state, the worse the actual quality of life seems to get. Kentucky is home to atrocious poverty and infrastructure almost everywhere, with roads matching buildings, full of holes for your axle to brake on. Those who can't bear to do this to their own vehicles will be remiss too, as public transportation is limited, and the more rural areas won't have privately owned services like Uber as readily available as metropolitan areas would. And for those who feel the bluegrass state will be worth it anyway, thanks to its beautiful nature, just wait until the tornadoes hit. While the most famous tornado region in the country may be Tornado Alley, Kentucky sits right in the Hoosier Alley, which is the third most active region for tornadoes in the nation. And just when the tornadoes die down, and then the harsh, icy winter subsides, the severe thunderstorms will flood your little retirement oasis. Truly, Kentucky's spot as the worst state to retire to in America is well earned.